You might not realize it yet, but this could be a potentially life-saving purchase. Because as much as we don't like to talk about it, accidents can happen anywhere at any time. Accidents that can leave you unconscious when paramedics arrive. And sometimes our attacks can get so severe, we lose the ability to effectively communicate with first responders, which is why a medical ID band is so important. If you haven't heard of a medical ID band, it's a bracelet or sometimes necklace that contains essential medical information about the wearer, including anything from allergies to chronic conditions. It's one of the first things that first responders are trained to look for. Within seconds, they can determine what you have, what they should avoid giving you, and even how to treat you. Not only that, but any bystander would be able to read the information off of this bracelet to a 911 operator. For example, my medical ID band says the name of my condition, the most important things to avoid giving me, and down at the bottom tells them how to treat me. Keep my potassium above a 3.8. This is the fastest way for first responders to understand what your needs are. It's a huge benefit to both patients and medical professionals alike, but don't just take my word for it. This is Dr. Bill Harr. He's a nurse anesthetist, someone who performs anesthesia during surgeries, and is on our board of experts for the Periodic Paralysis Association. But before all of that, he's my dad. And also, a loving husband to somebody who has HKPP.
My wife Cheryl has had a medical ID band for the last 12 to 13 years. With her medical ID band, Cheryl is much more secure and I feel much safer, and it gives her independence. I don't have to be there in the event that something happens to tell people, hey, this person has hypokalemic periodic paralysis. I don't have to tell them, don't give succinylcholine, don't give glucose. Please check her potassium and make sure her potassium is stabilized. I've been a firefighter EMT for about 18 years. During my time in the service, I've came across several people with medical ID bracelets. Most of them would explain that they would have a seizure disorder or have diabetes, things like that. They would give us a heads up about, hey, here's how you need to take care of this patient.
So when does Dr. Harr recommend you wear your medical ID band?
Medical ID bands should be worn around the clock, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Regardless of what activity that you're doing, the medical ID band should always be on your person. Cheryl wears her ID band continuously, whether she's eating, sleeping, riding her horse, swimming. That ID band is always on her wrist.
And what information does he think a medical ID band should include?
Who the patient is, what is the condition, and any factors that need to be considered for emergency treatment to help the patient.
As it so happens, Cheryl was in need of a new medical ID band. The one she currently owns has been on her wrist for many years now. Curious to hear what information a patient thinks should go on a medical ID band, I sat down and talked with her while she ordered the new one. So what style of medical ID band are you looking for?
Probably the clasp over here on the end. The Elite. Ooh. And I actually do like that one right there, the black with the red on it.
Just before jotting down the emergency information, I discussed with Cheryl about what Dr. Steve Cannon had mentioned you should avoid putting on a medical ID band. He suggests you don't list medications to administer, or mention risks of being unable to breathe or swallow. He says that these can cause inappropriate interventions, getting in the way of you getting the actual help you need.
Okay, now you get into the emergency information. So for my first line, I'm going to type the abbreviation of my condition.
Once Cheryl's fingers finally found the right keys on the keyboard, she filled out the potassium instructions the same way I showed you earlier on my ID band.
Because anything less than 3.8, I'm going to get symptomatic. Then when I get down into 3.6s, I start to paralyze. So if I go to the ER and they pull a potassium on me, and for example, it's 3.5, the average person, that's normal. Mm-hmm. For me, I'd be paralyzed.
So we have essentially like the same threshold for potassium level, but not everybody does.
Correct. Each individual with this condition needs to figure out where their threshold is for their symptoms. Now I list, for me, all the things I shouldn't have. So for this condition, I don't do well with sugar. No sugar, no dextrose, glucose, because those sugars really, really have a bad effect on me, as well as epinephrine. And also succinylcholine is another really bad one. And that's the abbreviation that's accepted pretty much across the board for that medication. Then this last line here is not specific to my periodic paralysis, it's specific to other conditions.
While Cheryl was filling out the information, I had to ask why she thought these triggers were the most important ones to list on here, as I know there are many others she always has to remain conscious of.
These are the ones for me that definitely cause life-threatening issues. Yes, I can eat the wrong things, but when I'm in a hospital setting, I'm probably not going to be eating. So I had to sit down and focus on, if I'm not able to speak for myself, what are the key points that emergency personnel need to know to keep me alive? Squads, EMS, if they come up and find you unconscious or appearing to be unconscious, because sometimes I paralyze so hard, I'll look like I'm unconscious and I'm not. A lot of times, first responders go to treat people as if they're a diabetic, so they tend to give sugar. Most people, it's not going to hurt them. Get a little extra sugar, not an issue. You know, if they were wrong, no big deal. But for a hypo, that can, again, become life-threatening. So you give me a little bit of sugar. I've been in Gemini a few times because of that mistake. I've had a situation where they accidentally hung a glucose IV or dextrose IV, whichever one. I don't remember my IVs. You might want to edit that out. And that also put me in Gemini. And the epi and the sucks definitely are instant reactions to where it makes me crash hard. And again, with heart dysrhythmias, full-blown paralysis.
What Cheryl seemed to be telling me is that ID bands should list the most harmful triggers you are most likely to encounter in an emergency situation. This will allow first responders to act immediately, rather than having to read off a list of all your allergies and triggers that they don't really need to know about to help you. The priority should be to get help safely, but also as fast as possible. Having said all that, I couldn't help but notice what was on the final line of her ID band. And I see you also put shellfish there. That's not anything related to HKPP, right? That's just an allergy you have?
Correct. That's just another allergy. But again, that's a life-threatening allergy. So I want to make sure I include that on there.
Okay. So most things that are life-threatening that you may encounter are also viable things to put on here. Not
Definitely.
Just solely for the purpose of HKPP.
Correct.
And with that, Cheryl's brand new medical ID band was complete. After talking with her and listening to Dr. Bill Harr's suggestions, hopefully this video was informative and gets your gears turning as to what you or a loved one could put on a medical ID band if you decide to purchase one. Something else that's hugely beneficial for people with periodic paralysis is a service dog. They can be trained to perform a variety of helpful tasks, and some have grown so strong of a connection to their owners, they can detect an attack before you do. We have an entire documentary episode dedicated to service animals, which you can click on right here.